the kind of sadness, in the book there's this fantastic backdrop of the place where you've moved to, and there's a lot of kind of geography and kind of descriptions of the landscape and the kind of wild places, and that somehow sort of has a kind of context of the wild places that you and your family are going to.
Yes, the location of the house becomes almost another character in the book.
Yes.
I didn't realise that had happened until I read it, but it does. There's a very strong sense of this wild place. We were out on a promontory. There were 3 other houses on the headland with us. It was 2 miles to a tiny village with 1 shop, and then a half-hour drive to anything else, and just farms. And we moved there thinking, well, not only because the house was big, we felt we could have, each of us have an independent household, which was the idea. Of course, that didn't work out. It wasn't just that. It was because as a writer, I was looking for something. I was looking for inspiration in life, and the sublime, really. This idea that you are at once nothing in the universe and at its dead centre. And didn't find it. In fact, found a grim parody of it. In fact, found the anti-sublime, because I quickly became so disheartened by the facts of our lives, once Nancy became so unhappy, and it was insoluble, that every time I went out into the landscape, all I saw there was my own unhappiness bouncing back at me. And that's the trouble with the country. I think that's why a lot of people can't hack it. Because you have to be a happy person. That's because that's just you. That's all there is. And Nancy, very interestingly, moved very quickly. That first summer she thought it was incredibly beautiful and loved everything. But as dementia took hold of her, she began to feel the same. She would have panics and say, there's nothing here, there's nothing, we have to get back to Edinburgh. Because she just craved a person-centred world and conversation and noise and things happening. And nothing was happening out there on the beach at all. And it began to frighten her. It began to frighten me.
Is that standard, that pace of deterioration, is that a standard pace? Is that a kind of medical path that all people with Alzheimer's?
It pretty much takes the same road, but the timings can be different. And not everybody gets to the stage Nancy's now. She's now actually, because she's lost herself completely, in a funny way, content. She's not at 7 yet, quite. At 7 she'd be physically really in decline.
Right.
But she's still very robust, trots around the care home all day and tries to break out quite frequently. What were we saying? I've lost the thread. My sequential steps! I've gone!
I've lost mine now.
Black humour. It's Kara's humour, sorry.
The pace in which the deterioration happens.
Oh yes, that. Yes, yes.
Whether it was a sort of standard pace. And you said it wasn't.
Well, there's Dr. Reichsberg, I'm probably mispronouncing him, but 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago now, in the US, came up with the 7 stages of Alzheimer's, which started, well, to give you a sort of quick guide to Nancy's deterioration. The very interesting thing for me is that I think she had it for years and years and years before anything was obvious. Because, I've known Nancy for nearly 30 years now. Yeah. And for about 5 years before it was obvious she had memory problems, she would not go to Safeways. And she would send Morris. And I read recently that they think now that Alzheimer's might begin in the entorhinal cortex, which I'm mispronouncing, I'm sure, which is to do with navigation and mapping and being able to find your way. And that bit of the brain is right next to the hippocampus and the memory-making area. So it's sort of disease moves from one to the other. So I think there may have been a really slow burn. Then it was the obvious dotty stuff, can't find my keys, what is a key? Can't open the door, can't find anything, stuff. And then going out on walks and getting lost. And then going to the shop and coming back without anything. And then the sequential steps thing, which was serious. When she moved in with us, pretty much every day there was a little change. There was the day where she could no longer peg clothes on the line because she couldn't get the peg to open and go on clothes. She was losing her three-dimensional spatial understanding of the world. That was going. The trouble for someone like me is that I'm fascinated by all of this, even though it's a little bit ghoulish, because obviously, all that's wrong with me is that I'm depressed by being a carer. Nancy has a terminal illness and there's no coming back from that. So it is a fertile source of guilt. I find it so interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I tell you, I've read this book many times, and every time I find there's something new in it.
There's lots of Wordsworth in it, if you like Wordsworth.
There's lots of Wordsworth, there's lots of cake. There's lots of surprises in there. And it's now actually going to be made into a movie by the BBC. One final question I want to ask is it's a kind of thing that I just always wonder is, when you love Nancy, who do you love now? Who is that person you love?
I love all of the Nancys, but there are lots of them.
Yeah.
I love the Nancy I first met in 1983 when I was taken home for the first time to my husband's house, and she made her famous Campbell's tomato soup pasta. I love that Nancy. I love the Nancy who was so incredibly lovely to my kids when they were little and would take them to see the ducks every time. And we would, Callum and I, Chris and I would go to the house, from our house, a couple of hours, and stay the weekend. And we would leave the children with them on a Saturday night. It was a ritual. And we would go to the cinema, which, you know, when you have young children is such a boon. It's so wonderful. And we'd say, when we went out, right, you know the rules, children, no staying up late, no adult television, no chocolate, knowing that the whole point was that these rules would be flouted. And when we got back, sure enough, there were small children running around giggling with chocolate all around their mouths, having just watched, you know, Big Brother or something, going to bed. I love that Nancy, and I love the Nancy who first came to live with us, who was so dependent on me and so loving. And I love the Nancy, even the hostile Nancy, because I understand her fear, and all I can feel for it is terrible, terrible sympathy. I would not wish that journey on anybody, really. And if I got diagnosed, I would make fairly swift arrangements to visit Switzerland, I think. It's knowing when, that's the thing, isn't it? And I love the Nancy of now, even though she has no idea who I am, just because she's the memory of Nancy.
Very fine.